What's the most disturbing secret you've been told? Girl I knew had just gotten fired from her job and was planning on jumping off a bridge. The job meant everything to her. I talked to her over 4 hours on the phone pleading with her, and she eventually decided not to jump. So she went home and shot herself instead. My dad was introduced to and taught how to do various drugs by his dad. They once got really high together and had sex. My mom told me this because I had just came out to my dad as gay and he didn't respond in the way I had hoped. Happy Father's Day. My aunt, who I don't speak to anymore, was talking to me about my granddad who died when I was 2, saying how he loved taking me to the park and hanging out with me and stuff like that when she was babysitting me. My mum then explained to me a few years later that he was a pedophile and had done stuff to all of his kids and my aunt's daughter, but that he wasn't ever allowed near me. So basically, my aunt used to let my granddad who was a pedophile hang out and let me stay with him for a day without my parents ever knowing. My friend was telling me about how jealous she was of her boyfriend spending time with one of his female cousins instead of her. I mean, that's his family though. Don't you think you're being a bit psycho getting jealous of him spending time with his own cousin? Well, he fucked his other one. I'm sorry, what? Turns out he'd lost his virginity to a different female cousin when they were teenagers. My father had 6 children from 4 different women. One he knocked up when he was married to his first wife. He put the child up for adoption in secret so his wife wouldn't know. The only people who knew were his mom and dad and the mother of the child's family. He lied to his current wife about the child when his second wife found the papers in his office while they were going through a divorce. 30 years later, 23andMe reunited all, and he found out quickly the secret wasn't really so secret. Everyone in the family knew and just didn't say anything. The child put up for adoption was me. What really sucks for him is, if he had just been open about it, it may have saved him many years of pain. In 1994 an now retired judge told me he and 2 childhood friends were responsible for the accidental death of a classmate down by a creek where they were playing one day. He had pretty much kept it to himself for a lifetime. A guy I hooked up with in college had a breakdown when we were blackout drunk and essentially admitted to killing a guy who had taken advantage of his little sister and burying the body. He was a total wiener of a guy who was always trying to hype himself up and exaggerate to be a bigger, better, manlier person, so I didn't think much of it at the time. The timing would have made him a teenager and the man a full-fledged adult. It just felt like another bullshit story he was always telling. But sometimes I think back and wonder if there's any truth to it. I've told the story on here before, but a girl I worked with once told me about her first love. They dated for a while, fell madly in love, and lost their virginities to each other. Her family situation was weird. Her parents weren't married, but when her dad was in town, her parents were a couple, and when he wasn't they weren't. Well, one of the times that he was in town, she introduced him to her boyfriend. They got along and got to talking, and he asked about the kid's family. After the kid went home, her dad told her she couldn't see him anymore. Turns out he was the kid's father. She'd unknowingly fallen in love with and lost her virginity to her half-brother. And yes, I know this also happened on an episode of House. I was told this story back in '99 before that show was a thing. My classmate in high school, I thought he was pretty weird, but also a nice guy. Turned out he's bipolar, and he manages it with medication. But one time he was off it, and he lost control in an argument with his little brother. He ended up beating the living crap out of the poor kid. Once he regained his senses and realized what he did, he tried to kill himself. I'm not sure how, he didn't specify. His dad was also an abusive drunk douchebag who occasionally beat him up. He told the story pretty calmly. I really hope he's doing much better now. When I was about 10 years old, my mom told me that when she was 12 years old, she was in bed at night. She lived in Puerto Rico. She heard her mom and dad arguing in the kitchen. Her dad might have been drunk. I don't recall if my mom said she heard her mom screaming and then go silent. Her dad had stabbed her mom to death. He went to prison. My mom and her siblings got adopted out to other families. I always thought my aunt, who suffers from a bit of depression and anxiety, never had children because of depression and anxiety. However, I managed to piece some things together. I was with her last month and we were talking about life and catching up. I'm finally an adult, so we talked more about life in general, got onto the topic of religion. She had later revealed to me that she was gang raped by a few Catholic boys at her church, which is why she left religion. I later asked my mother, her sister, about it, and I come to find out a really morbid story. It's a long story, but I will tell. Doctor it. My aunt was raped at night in a park. She was pregnant and sent off to another state by my grandparents for her senior year of high school. She had the child, but a family adopted the child. My aunt returned to her home state 6 years later. My mom was sitting at the bar my aunt was bartending at, noticed my aunt was off. My aunt received a letter from the adopted child's family notifying her that her child was killed in a car accident that day. Only my mother, my aunt and my grandparents were aware of this, as they kept it under the radar from the entire family. Now I know, and honestly wish I hadn't. I always thought my aunt was moody, but now I can understand why. I wish I could do something for her. Not really a secret, but it was something told to me once and then never discussed again. Close family friend had blocked some memories from her childhood, during which her grandfather did horrible things to her and her brother. She was fighting brain cancer as an adult and attributed her sickness in part to the repressed memories. I was told what happened to her, with details, and never shared it with anyone else. Use your imagination. It's worse than that. She died from cancer. People like that grandfather should be castrated and thrown to the wolves. As a young teenager, one of my closest female friend was raped by her cousin, who was the same age as her, multiple times over the course of 3 years. Eventually her father found out about this, and a trial happened. That cousin ended up having nothing much more than a fine and kind of a warning: we watch over you now. This guy's now on the run to compete in the next Olympic Games, and my friend is fucking broken from the inside and barely able to trust males. I'm one of the few persons outside of the family who knows. My sister-in-law doesn't think her third child, 5 years old, is her husband's. They were broken up around the date of conception. The husband has brown hair, brown eyes, same with their first 2 children. The third, the questionable one, has blonde hair, blue eyes. It's been a running joke so far. I honestly don't think the husband cares to know the truth at this point. The fucked up part? Sil has been caught texting other men. I think she's stopped now, but she used to chat with her brothers, my husband, friend, who has blonde hair and blue eyes. Same rectangular head shape as the third kid. He is around 6'5" and questionable kid is huge for his age. The other fucked up part? My mother-in-law says she knows who the father is, and it's not my husband's friend. It's whatever now Mayo. I made an R4R post asking about secrets. A woman messaged me from a throwaway account, deleted already. As a girl, she had sleepovers at her house all the time. Her father was well liked by parents and would spoil them with tequila and nail polish and whatnot. What actually happened is that come bedtime, her father would drug the girls, undress them, pose them with himself for each other, and take photos. If she didn't keep bringing girls over, her father would abuse her instead. I found that to be pretty disturbing. Or it could have been made up. That would be pretty disturbing too. About 20 years ago, a member of my family was the principal teacher in a very small rural elementary school. Well, the equivalent in the country where we live. One day she was informed by local school authorities that her school was to have a new student. He was an 11-year-old boy from elsewhere in the country who'd been accused of sexually assaulting 2 boys in his old school. It was an allegation. No more. She had no choice but to accept this boy into her school. But also, given he was a child himself and entitled to a presumption of innocence, she was also not allowed to inform parents of the allegation against him. In order to protect the other children in her class, a special teacher's assistant was required to be in his presence at all times. But again, she was not allowed to tell the children or their parents why this teacher's assistant was in their class. Leaving aside multiple ethical issues raised by all of this, can you imagine how stressful it was for my family member to have this kid in her class? Could you imagine if this kid did something to one of the kids in her class and the parents, many of whom were her lifelong friends, discovered my family member had known about the previous allegation and hadn't warned them? Fortunately, the whole thing had a happy ending.